Good evening to one and all. Warm greetings to everybody present. And thank you very, very much for the warm introduction and also for the invite. Um, we will be roughly speaking today on the mammoth epic, which is the Mahabharata. And it is actually a text on which most Indians, and now because of the reach of Indology in various other parts of the globe, it is also a text which is celebrated and studied, and it is put under scrutiny in different countries as well. So, when we speak of the Mahabharata, it is not a surprise that there are multiple notions and varying notions that almost everybody has. It is also a tale about which all of us, I am very certain, will have a bleak idea of. If not the nuances of the entire epic, we will roughly have an idea of the story, how it proceeds, what are the major events, what are the major highlights. So, the epic is not an unknown category to begin with. It is a tale that we have grown up with. It is a tale that we have watched multiple times on the television. It is a tale that we have read adaptations of. It is also a story that we have derived moral lessons from. It is also a story from which a lot of everyday fables, everyday moral lessons are extracted. And that is actually the beauty of the text, that it is very, very commonplace. It is very everyday. It is something that every Indian and every individual, for that matter, every human can resonate with. So, having said that, let's begin with um, the session for today. So, the Mahabharata, of course, if we call it an epic, I will call it an epic to begin with. It is a very self congratulatory text. Self congratulatory text in the sense that right at the very start of the text, right when it opens up with a phrase that which occurs here occurs elsewhere, but that which does not occur here occurs nowhere else. What does it mean? It means that whatever is found in the world, every kind of a human situation, every kind of a human emotion will have a presence in the Mahabharata. But what is not mentioned in the Mahabharata will not have an existence in the outer external world as well. And this is a very, very bold proclamation to make. The text is making that proclamation by itself. It is not any scholar of the Mahabharata or any reader of the Mahabharata which is quoting these lines. It is Mahabharata itself at the very start which is saying these two lines, which means that any kind of a contemporary socio-political cultural relevance that the human existence is grappling with will have a connotation in the Mahabharata. That makes our life extremely easy, because whatever complexities, whatever dilemmas, whatever issues, whatever everyday nuances we are dealing with will have an answer in the Mahabharata. And all we need to do is open up the text and read it. Now, the challenge with the Mahabharata is that it is a very long text. It is 11 times the size of Iliad. Iliad is our Greek epic. It is 11 times the size of that. It is also written in a language which is quite foreign. It is written in Sanskrit, and Sanskrit as a language is something that not every commoner is used to. The length of the text, the density of the text, the volume of the text, and the language of the text often makes the text a little far-fetched. But that is exactly the beauty of it. The density, the complexity, the length of it has answers and nuances to everyday life struggles. With the Mahabharata, we have a lot of adaptations. We have a lot of televised adaptations like the one we had in the 1990s with the B.R. Chopra Mahabharata that used to be telecasted on every Sunday, 9 o'clock. Researchers have shown that it had amassed so much of viewership that Indian streets used to be extremely empty on Sundays because every Indian household would be glued in front of their television to watch the B.R. Chopra Mahabharata. If you walk into a bookstore or if you walk into a book fair rather, there you will always find an Amar Chitra Katha stall which will have an extensive range of books that will speak of the various characters of the Mahabharata. That is a suitable entry point to introduce young children, young readers into the characters, the stories, the tales of the Mahabharata. If you go a little advanced in your readership, there are multiple translations of the Mahabharata. We have the Bibek Debroy's 10-volume translation. We have Kisari Mohan Ganguly's translation. We have the Bhandarkar Oriental Research Institute's critical edition of the Mahabharata. We have the Kamla Subramaniam Mahabharata. We have the R.K. Narayan Mahabharata. And such, similarly, we have a plethora of translations of the original text from Sanskrit to English and in other languages also, Hindi, Kannada, so many other languages. For the purpose of critical study or for the purpose of academic study, we have one text, one translation rather, which is by Kisari Mohan Ganguly. It is freely available on the internet, it is copyright free, and it is 5,000 pages long. That I believe comes closest to the original Sanskrit text because it is weaved in a way, it is written in a way which is extremely poetic. It is almost Shakespearean in its quality. It's extremely delicate. It has very soft nuances that helps us grasp the meaning of the stories, the fables, the moral lessons very delicately. These are the translations. And of course, apart from that, there are also transcreations, such as the most notable one is P. Lal's transcreation of the Mahabharata. If anybody is interested in reading on and off of the Mahabharata, and if they can really get their hands on P. Lal's translation, is absolute delight in reading that text. I got my copy through a kind lady, but if you can get your hands on that text, it's a beautiful entry point to start the readings of the Mahabharata. So, there are multiple versions, there are multiple adaptations, there are multiple sources through which we can make ourselves aware of what the basic plot line of the Mahabharata is. Now, for the receptors of the text, for the people who are receiving the text, there are innumerable ways in which the Mahabharata can be interpreted, in which it can be understood. For instance, it is often called as a Mahakavya, a grand poem. When we compare it to the Ramayana is called as a Kavya, which is a poem. The Mahabharata is called as a Mahakavya, which is a grand poem. At other times, it is called as an epic, which means that it is larger than life, it is grandiose, it has a beginning, it has a middle, and it has an end. It has a unity of time, space, and action, like we have, like we have through the studies of Aristotle. Sometimes it is called as a folk epic. Sometimes it is called as a tragedy. Sometimes it is called as the fifth Ved, and most importantly, it is also called as an itihas. Comes from two words, iti and has. If we translate this very loosely, it means thus it happened. What does it do for us? It tells us that the text of the Mahabharata is perhaps not fiction. It is actually the history of India that has been recorded through multiple interpolations, through multiple editions. But it is actually an account of the historicity of India that would have happened at some point in time. But apart from all of this, it is often seen as a text that glorifies Krishna as one of the avatars of Vishnu. And that is one of the most popular, one of the most what do I say, easily understood interpretations of the text. Sometimes it is also called as a smriti, which means that something which stems from memory. It is also called oftentimes as a shastra. So when you have so many connotations attached to one text, we come to understand that there is no genre fixation to the text. We cannot hold the text into one box. We cannot fixate the text. Rather, what does it do for us? The Mahabharata becomes an entire tradition in itself. It becomes a living tradition. It is almost like a concoction. It is a sweet amalgamation of the oral, because it has legends, it has ballads, and the written. And therefore, if we even attempt to categorize the Mahabharata, or to define it, or to box it, it is going to be a futile attempt. So, fundamentally, we need to understand that the Mahabharata is not just an epic, or just history, or just a tragedy, or just a folk epic. Rather, it is an entire living tradition of the Indian masses. Moving forward, if we speak of the text historically, um, it is speaking of a war, an 18-day war, which, when we date it, it is roughly to have happened in 3500 BC to 1000 BC. That is the rough timeline of the war. But the epic over time was constantly created through repeated interventions, interpolations, additions. But more importantly, it is speaking of an age that we are currently occupying. It is speaking of the Kali Yuga, which is characterized by certain features like the color black, lesser life expectancy, or the inhabitants of the world indulging in excessiveness and selfish greed. In fact, the P. Lal's transcreation of the Mahabharata that I spoke of just a few minutes back, he connotates that the Kali Yuga is estimated to have begun in the year 3102 BC with the coronation of King Parikshit. Who's King Parikshit? King Parikshit is the grandson of Abhimanyu. The warrior, the grand warrior that we have, he's the grandson of Parikshit. And this Kali Yuga, which is supposed to have started in 3102 BC, is supposed to last up till 4,27,000 years. So the Mahabharata, if we speak of the Mahabharata on varying time scales, it is speaking of two time scales. One time scale is of Vishnu and his several avatars, and that gives a divine angle to the text. And the other angle is that of the four yugs. So the Mahabharata is speaking of the third yug, the Dwapar Yug, which is seen as a concoction, an amalgamation of the idealism of the first two ages and the brutal realism of the fourth age, which is the Kali Yuga. And it is this concoction that leads to multiple complexities, dilemmas, and paradoxes, because it is also speaking of idealism while talking of an age which is going to usher, that is of Kali Yuga, that is of excessive greed, indulgence, so on and so forth. But a wise question to ask is, why do we even discuss a text which is as old as time? Because it is not a novelty to say that the studies on the Mahabharata is highly saturated. Um, some of them are as old as the text itself. There are libraries after libraries which are being which have works on the Mahabharata. But while I was mulling over this question, I came across this writer. Who he's a critic of the Mahabharata called as S.S. Prower, and he makes a very interesting statement. He says that India as a land is very fertile in an attempt to pour old wine in a new bottle. Very beautiful statement. What does it mean? It means the reinterpretation of the classical stories, the myths, the legends embodied in many literary works, and transmuting it to the contemporary scenarios where we are dealing with questions of, say, primogeniture, gender, law, governance, politics, so on and so forth. So the Mahabharata also becomes a representation of ancient wisdom for modern times. It is almost like a universal philosophy with timeless pieces of advice that can be applied to the 21st century. The only thing we have to do is open the text and read it. In fact, we have a very famous critic of the Mahabharata, Max Muller, historian as well, and he makes a very interesting claim. He says that whether Dharmaraj, Yudhishthir, or Duryodhan were historical personalities is not a question that should worry us. Rather, what should actually interest us, what should rather worry us, is the kind of life which is depicted there. The lives of the heroes, the lives of the villains, their ambitions, their tragedies, all of it have a contemporary relevance. Though the characters might have lived 2 or 3 thousand years ago, the problems faced by them have in no way become old and irrelevant. And when we bring down the text from that age to the 21st century, it becomes a convenient model. The characters become a convenient reference point through which we can understand the everyday life situation a little better. Now, unfortunately, the Mahabharata has a misconception of being a tragedy. It is often called as a doomsday epic. Now, this is extremely unfortunate because there have been times when keeping a text of the Mahabharata has been considered ominous. The paradox is that perhaps the Gita, which is a part of the Mahabharata, that is read almost every single day or referred to every single day in almost every Indian household, but the mammoth epic that contains it has become an ominous text. Why is it so? Because it is talking of strife, it is talking of war, it is talking of conflict, it is talking of bloodshed. And there is a certain gloom that surrounds the Mahabharata, which is extremely unfortunate. Now, even if it is a tragedy, I believe that it has a power to exalt us. Exalt us is surprise us, create a sense of cosmic awe rather than to depress us. And specifically, when we contrast it to the Ramayana, which is the co-epic, the Ramayana is known to have drawn in emotions of karuna, the karuna ras, or compassion, whereas the Mahabharata invites cosmic awe. It is almost as if we are appalled, we are surprised that the text has so much to offer. And it is this cosmic awe that eventually leads to an element of peace, an element of quietude, an element of shant in the minds of the readers. In fact, after going through the entire journey of 18 parvs, we will find the chief characters saying that they find no peace, no meaning in the war that has happened. It is absolutely futile. You will have the chief character Yudhishthir saying that even if I have won the uh, four worlds, I find no joy, I find no peace. And that is when the element of peace and quietude will be introduced in the text of the Mahabharata. In fact, Anandavardhan, one of the literary critics in Indian literary tradition, has worked on this entire issue, where he says that of all the rasas, it is the Shant ras that is being invoked in the Mahabharata. It is not only Rodra, which is anger. It is not only Bhibats. It's not only Shringar. It is rather Shant that occupies the minds of the readers by the time they journey from the Adi Parva to the Mahaprasthanika Parva. And this is also interesting because when we compare Indian epics or Indian literature, or I should be saying Sanskrit literature for that matter, with Western literature, the Western literature, Western epics have conflict, death, disease that prevails towards the end of the text. But when we see Sanskrit literature most often than not will always speak of happy endings. It is always going to speak of resolution of the conflict. It is always going to speak of triumph over death and disease. So the entire misconception that we have around the epic, of it being an ominous text, of it talking of strife and conflict and treachery and war and bloodshed, it actually triumphs over all of that to give us a feeling of cosmic awe, to give us a feeling of peace, quietude, and shant. Moving on, there are a lot of works which have been done on the Mahabharata. I will just enlist a few of them if in case anybody is interested in reading on the Mahabharata. We have a very notable work by Iravati Karve. She was an anthropologist and she was writing in the 1970s. She wrote this very remarkable work called as The End of an Epoch. The End of an Epoch speaks of the Mahabharata in its the Mahabharata with its various characters. And from 1970s to 2015 or 16, I think, we have Gurucharan Das writing a work called as The Difficulty of Being Good on the Subtle Art of Dharma, which is taking forward the work of Iravati Karve, and they are doing the tedious process of detailed characterization. What are they doing? He is associating one stark emotion to one character which is outstanding in the text. So if you read through Gurucharan Das works, you will have characters like chapters like Ashwathama's revenge. You will have Draupadi's courage. You will have Bhishma's helplessness. You will have Krishna's divinity, so on and so forth. What is it doing for us? It is helping us attach a level of humanness through one single human emotion to every character. And it is when we read the text of Guru Charan Das will we understand that how the text, which is so distant in time and age, can be brought down to a human plane. In fact, the text also tells us that even the aspects of divinity which have been talked about in the epic, that divinity also has to act on a human plane. There is not a deniable quotient that the talks of divinity are not there in the text. It is very much there, but the divine also has to step down on the human plane and experience the same complexities, paradoxes, dilemmas, turmoils. And it is that beauty of stepping down from divinity to the human plane that makes the Mahabharata serviceable to the Indian audience even today. Apart from that, of course, there are a lot of critical studies which are done on the Mahabharata, say by Bimal Krishna Matilal. We have P. Lal, we have C. Rajagopalachari, we have Subramanyam Swami, we have a lot, Subramanyam Swami, we have a lot of works. We also have a lot of modern day retellings and reinterpretations. For a young reader of the Mahabharata, they can read through Chitra Banerjee Divakurani's, they can read through Kavita Kane, they can read through Anand Nilkant, they can also read Girish Karnad's Yayati, they can also read through this play Andhyog by Dharamveer Bharti. So all of these are post 1950s works and productions that are almost like a reinterpretation of some of the epic themes or the epic stories, right? Now, what is interesting is that what the Mahabharata as a popular religious text, um, and that you will see if you have read any of these things, mean in the Indian culture is very different from what it is when it is treated as a historical and a literary text under scrutiny. Because for Indians, we have an assumed familiarity with the text. We understand the text through the proverbs, through the stories, through the tales. That is the popular viewership of the Mahabharata. But when we shift the text from the popular viewership into academia, then there are different discourses like what are the critical studies, what is the questions of historicity, what are the questions of authorship, what are the questions of authenticity, so on and so forth. Moving on to the specific theme that we should be iterating for today's lecture is on the idea of dharma. Now, dharma is a very, I would say, a delicate domain to delve on because it is an untranslatable terminology. It is something that cannot be translated. In all the works or in all the translations of the Mahabharata in different languages, specifically in English, you will see that certain words remain untranslated. And dharma is that one word which will always remain untranslated. Why will it remain untranslated? Because it is very difficult to grasp the essence of the text into another language. In fact, of in the Mahabharata itself, we have the prominent character of Bhishma in the Sabha Parv saying that I cannot really explain the meaning of dharma because it is sushma. Sushma is a Sanskrit word which, when we loosely translate it into English, it means subtle. So he really says that I cannot really fathom what the meaning of dharma is because it is extremely subtle. It is extremely complex, right? So even our attempts on an everyday basis to understand the terminology of dharma is just a very humble attempt, because what the term actually means is, I believe, something beyond the human understanding. But with whatever little knowledge and whatever little abilities we have, let's try to unlock it. However, first thing that we know is dharma in that context is understood as law. So, one of the lenses through which law is represented in the Mahabharata is through the larger prism of dharma, right? So, of the many definitions of dharma, law is one of it, and it is also uh, exemplified through the Dharma Shastras, such as the Manu Smritis, Vishnu Smritis, the Yoga Sutras, so on and so forth. However, such an association of dharma with law is problematic, because why? It makes the concepts both of law and dharma extremely narrow and inflexible and extremely rigid, and we don't want to do that to any terminology. And if we if we understand law as dharma, then one is left constantly pendulating between the written law, the one which are the dictates of the society, and the will to follow one's own consciousness. However, um, Professor Sutton from the Oxford Center of Hindu Studies, he has made a very remarkable entry point, and he says that the Indian culture and the Indian thought process has collectively resolved that they perhaps do not wish to abide by these rule books and instead devise their own standards of living, which are both personal and subjective, right? So they gradually, what they did, they began to set aside these extensive manuals of rule books as a conscious and a collective effort, right? So what did it do for us? It took away the fixity that the term law and dharma had. So they are no more rigid, extremely boxed terminologies, rather, they become elusive, ever changing, fluid concepts. And with that, we also come to understand that dharma not only states what the law is, but rather it ensures what the right implementation of law is. It is a thought that we can use in the current this day situation, because we have seen the collapse of the judiciary and the legal practices, and if we try to understand dharma as law, then we will be able to better navigate through the legal practices of the current day situation. I want to bring your attention to the second parv of the Mahabharata, which is the Sabha parv, and it has this very unfortunate um, disrobing of the chief queen Draupadi. So, after being dragged into the Jayant Sabha, which we can also understand as the modern day court. The chief queen of the Pandavas first takes up refugian law. She argues her case as a lawyer. She asks certain legal questions. But at that point in time, the entire legal framework seems to have collapsed. It is incapable, or rather insufficiently equipped, to answer to her appeals. And it is at that juncture that she appeals to the moral righteousness of the Kuru men. And she asks this very fundamental question. This I have taken from J.A.B. Van Buten's translation of the Sabhaparv. She asks, what is left of the dharma of the kings that they are allowing this catastrophe to occur? Again, everything else is translated, but the word dharma remains untranslated. When we try to decode it, when we try to unlock the meaning of this sentence, what do we get? Dharma not only means law here, dharma not only means duty here, which is also a popular rendition of the terminology. Rather, it speaks of one's innate consciousness of what is right and what is wrong. So, if we use this terminology and equate it with the term dharma, what do we have? We have what is left of the innate consciousness of the kings that they are allowing this catastrophe to occur. So we have seen that dharma is law. We also understand that dharma is duty, the moral principles that you have to abide by, the obligations to the family, the community, the society, the world at large. And most of the characters in the Mahabharata act out the way they do, basing themselves on the principles of duty. Right? And this introduces the concept of Kula Dharma, which is community, the dharma of the community, and the Swadharma, the duty towards one's own self. When there is a clash between Kula Dharma and Swadharma, what prevails? The Kula Dharma prevails. The larger good for the largest number of people. It is a utilitarian philosophy. We have seen Dharma in that aspect also, but in this case, Dharma as a duty collapses. What does not collapse is this understanding of dharma, that it is the innate consciousness of every individual who has a sense of righteousness. So when she asks what is left of the innate consciousness, she actually uncodes for us the real terminology of the word dharma, right? But dharma is only one of the ways in which we understand the value systems of the world of Mahabharata. We also understand another very complex um, terminology which is called as Aranyamsya. It is I encountered the word through the readings of Mukund Lat, and he catalogs for us three episodes. He catalogs for us the mongoose episode, he catalogs for us the yaksh episode, and the last one is the story of the parrot and the tree. I'll give you a brief of all three of them. We are very much familiar with the Yaksh episode, in which there are questions of life, morality, spirituality, and larger existence which are being asked by Yaksh to Yudhishthir to safeguard the lives of his four brothers, and Yaksh is, of course, Lord Dharma. That is the to and fro dialogue that is happening. It is then that we first encounter the word Aranyamsya. We also encounter this word towards the end of the epic during the Ashwamedh Yagna. The battle has come to an end. Yudhishthir has won the war, and he now goes on to perform the Ashwamedh Yagna. In the entire phenomena of the yagna, which is extremely elaborate, grandiose. It is almost like a celebration of the world. There is a mongoose which comes in, and he criticizes Yudhishthir that the Ashwamedh yagna that he is doing has no value, has no meaning whatsoever. And he rolls his body on the ground, and he says that I have not caught any um, dust on my body. And he says that this place is of no value, this place is of no meaning, because it is only following dharma on the basis of the dictates of the society. The Mongo story has another subplot which you can read about in the text or otherwise as well. There are multiple transcreations and translations of it also. It is through the mongoose that we come to understand that dharma as duty collapses if there is extreme grandiose attached to it. And dharma as extreme ritualistic practices also collapses if there is no compassion and virtue attached to it. And it is in this episode that we have the second encountering of the word Aranyamsha. The third one is the parrot and the poisoned tree episode. So, the Mahabharata tells us a tale of a tree that has been giving refuge to a parrot for many, many years. One fine day, the tree has been hit by a hunter's poisoned arrow. Because of the poison, the tree begins to wither. Slowly and steadily, its leaves begins to wither away. Its branches begins to lose away. And the tree speaks to the parrot and it says that I have no life left. So why don't you go and take your refuge in some other tree? Because anyway, I will not live for long. I have been poisoned by an arrow and very soon I will die. The parrot says, what does the parrot say? The parrot says that no, I will not abandon you, because it is in your shelter that I have become what I have become. It is in your shelter that I have grown. It is in your shelter that I have had my food. It is in your shelter that I have had my protection. It is in your shelter that I have had my existence. I cannot abandon you just because you have been poisoned. And it is a test. Everything in the Mahabharata is a test. Everything in the Mahabharata is a trick, a trick to challenge your sense of righteousness and wrong. And this is a story which is being seen by Lord Indra. And he witnesses it and he comes to the parrot and he says that I am appalled by your sense of compassion. I am appalled by your sense of virtue. Ask for a boon. And he asks for the life of the tree to be regained. This compassion of the parrot is the third instance in the Mahabharata where the term Aranyamsya has been used. And of course, Mukundlath has catalogued all three incidences. So, what it actually does for us is that it draws for us a journey from Dharma that is once understood as law, then it is understood as duty, then it is also understood as morality. But morality we know is a very tricky business. What is moral for me might not be moral for you. It is an extremely fluid, subjective category. Then it moves on to occupy the position of ritualistic activities, like we have seen in the mongoose episode of the Ashwamedh Yagna, right? So the Mahabharata transmutes from having the terminology of dharma transmutes from having these four categories, and eventually it becomes very, very synonymous or close to the meaning of Aranyamsya, which means pure compassion, pure virtue. And this we can draw back to the Sabha Parv when the chief queen is asking, what is left of the compassion of the kings that they are allowing this catastrophe to occur. So, when we are struggling in our everyday life situations as to what is the meaning of the term dharma, it is of course law, it is of course a duty, it is of course morality, and of course it is ritualistic practices and techniques and a plethora of other things. But in its core essence, it is the innate quality, the innate sense of right and wrong that any and every individual possesses. In fact, there is a very beautiful terminology that Professor Sutton had spoken of. He says that dharma has been used as a phrase in the Mahabharata by Krishna, and the phrase is called as Dharma Megh Samadhi. Dharma Megh Samadhi. And there is a dialogue that occurs between Krishna and Arjun. And in that dialogue, he charts out the difference between a dharmacharin and a dharmatma. Who is a dharmacharan? A dharmacharan is a person who follows the dictates of dharma as it is written down in the rule book. Just like we had spoken of at the in the beginning of the session, there are rule books, there are dharma shastras which lay down for us the dictates of how a society needs to be run, what are the rules of governance, what are the rules of administration. Person who follows that is a dharmacharan. What is a dharmatma? A dharmatma is somebody who has absorbed the core of dharma as compassion into his very being. So Krishna guides Arjun that our job as human beings, as individuals with a rational thinking mind, is not to be a dharmacharan, rather it is to be a dharma atma. And the beauty of the Mahabharata is that it gives agency, it gives choice, it gives freedom, and it gives expression to every character. The divinity in the Mahabharata is not a punishing god. Rather, for anybody who has studied Calvin, it is almost like a Calvinist is not Calvinistic, rather, it is a forgiving God. It is a God that gives you agency. It is a God that gives you freedom. It is a God that gives you choice. And we will see multiple episodes in the Mahabharata where choice has been given to every individual. Towards the end of Gita, after having the entire discourse, what does Krishna says? Now it is up to you whether do you want to fight the war or not. Later on, there is a episode in which it's called as the rift between Arjun and Yudhishthir. The war is going on, and Arjun has taken a vow that whoever condemns my Gandiv, my bow, my divine in a weapon, I am going to kill that person. I will not tolerate anything against my weapon, my Gandiv. And of all the people, it is his own brother Yudhishthir who goes ahead and insults him and insults his Gandiv. And it was almost in a moment of zest when he says that why are we not able to win the war when we have warriors like Bhim and Arjun, and we have weapons like the Brahmastra and the Gandiv? Why are we not able to win the war? So he takes it upon himself, Arjun takes it upon himself, that it is an insult. It is almost like defaming my valor, and it is defaming my weaponry, which is a divine celestial instrument. So I have to go ahead and keep my vow. And Krishna, like always, steps down and he says that no, anything that is followed in letter and not in spirit is not dharma. So if you are following your vow in letter but not in its spirit, then it is not dharma, right? So there are multiple episodes where most characters will come at a junction of cross section, where they will have to make a difficult choice. And the Mahabharata will tell us that it is never about the right versus the wrong. It is always about a lesser right and a more wrong, or vice versa. And this is what defines complexities and dilemmas and paradoxes for us. It is the life of the characters, just like the lives of human beings, is never in shades of complete black or complete white. Rather, it is in shades of gray. And it is in this shade of gray do we need to find our human existence. And then, of course, when we move ahead, we find that even though the Mahabharata is speaking of the military, it is speaking of war, it is speaking of militarianism, there is almost a complete rejection of that. The Mahabharata is not celebrating war, rather, it is telling us what would happen if such a state is allowed to manifold. What will we have? We will have complete catastrophe. So it is almost like a conduct literature. It is almost like a sense of warning that the Mahabharata is pointing out to us. So the misconception that we have of the Mahabharata, that it is speaking of the military, it is speaking of bloodshed, destruction, and all of that, it is not speaking of that. Rather, it is speaking of an eventual state of disarmament and peace. And it is most prominently exemplified in Arjun's pre-war reluctance to engage in combat, and Yudhishthir's post-war refusal to accept the throne, or when he says that I find no peace even if the war has been won. So it is matter of surprise that the final note of the Mahabharata is that of Shantras. It is of everlasting tranquility, and this we feel as readers of Mahabharata as we go ahead in the final parva, which is the Mahaprasthanika parva, right? So I think I would stop here, and if there are any questions, then I would invite certain questions.